Welcome back. Oil prices once again setting the tone for stocks. Take a look at where we stand with Brent at 110.22. That's up 1.5% right now. Crude oil's at 96.47, up 1/3%. President Trump is securing support from allies. 5 European countries and Japan have pledged their readiness in helping to pry open the Strait of Hormuz, vowing to intervene against Iran and ensure safe passage through that critical waterway. The president welcomed Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi to the White House yesterday, and they spoke about it. Watch.
Look, I expect Japan to step up because, we have that kind of relationship, and we step up for Japan. So I'm not surprised that they would step up. We don't need much. We don't need anything. I mean, honestly, we don't need anything from Japan or from anyone else, but I think it's appropriate that people step up. In the case of Japan, I hear they get more than 90% of their oil through the Strait. So that's a big reason to step up.
Joining me now is former Energy Secretary under President Trump in the first term, Dan Brouillette. Great to see you, Dan. Thanks so much for being here. What is your assessment of the response that you've heard from allies, and how significant could their assistance be?
Well, great to be with you, Maria. I think it's remarkable. I mean, we're looking at 5 countries who went literally from a hell no, we're not going to help you, to signing a statement of support yesterday. And I think the president is exactly right to suggest that those who use the Strait the most should be responsible for opening it, or at least be partially responsible for opening it. I think it's an incredible piece of diplomacy on the president's part. And I think over the course of the next couple of days, you're going to see a lot of these countries show up with their navies, show up with their assets. I know that England is already down in Tampa working with CENTCOM on planning for some of the activities that are going to occur over the next few days. So I think it's a remarkable piece of diplomacy on the president's part.
Well, what else can the U.S. do right now? We spoke with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, here yesterday, and he broke a lot of news. In particular, said that they may very well in the coming days unsanction oil that is currently sitting on the water near Iran, and they also may release more oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Tell me your thoughts in terms of other ideas that could help this administration in getting prices lower and calming this situation.
Well, I think what Scott is referring to in terms of unsanctioning the oil or desanctioning the oil, what that does is send a loud signal to traders. Much of the price increase that we've seen over the course of the last couple of days and weeks have been due to traders pricing in the risk of moving through the Strait of Hormuz. These are not supply problems per se. They're not production problems, I should say. So releasing this oil to allow traders to now legally trade it increases the supply on the marketplace and will reduce or at least mitigate the price increases over the next few weeks. Yeah. That's what Scott is thinking about. I think the other move, the other smart move on the part of the administration was to desanction Venezuelan oil. And I think what you're seeing there is part of a longer-term strategy. The president removed Maduro. He's releasing Venezuela oil, and that's providing an enormous buffer, in addition to the incredible production of the U.S. industry here in the United States, an incredible buffer to these price increases.
Well, it's a great point that you make, because when you look from above 30,000 feet and look at what this president has done in terms of strategy, beginning with Venezuela, now on Iran, it's strengthened the U.S.'s hand significantly against our real #1 adversary, which is China. But we've got also Russia in the backdrop, and we've got new information this morning, the U.S. issuing a general license to temporarily allow the sale of Russian oil on the open market, which was loaded onto a ship on March 12th. The Treasury Secretary told me yesterday about that unsanctioning possibility of the Iranian oil, which is already at sea. Watch this.
There was 130 million barrels of floating storage. In the coming days, we may unsanction the Iranian oil that's on the water. It's about 140 million barrels. That's 10 days to 2 weeks of supply that the Iranians had been pushing out. That would have all gone to China. In essence, we will be using the Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep the price down for the next 10 or 14 days as we continue this campaign. So we have lots of levers. The U.S. could unilaterally do another SPR release to keep the price down.
In your view, Dan, what would be the trigger to unleash more from the SPR?
Look, I think if there's a real supply shock, if we can't get our hands on barrels, if the world is simply denied access to physical oil, then that's the time to release the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Apart from that, I would suggest that the other moves are perhaps even more important. Desanctioning the oil, the other move the administration made this week, waiving the Jones Act, those are the types of tools that I think have a more immediate impact.
Yeah, that's true. Cheryl, I mean, look, when you look at what has taken place here, the price is up in terms of the money that's being made from some of these Gulf nations, but they're in the middle of this disruption, and obviously they're not doing regular business with what's going on right now.
We had Saudi officials come out overnight and say that oil could hit $180 a barrel depending on the time frame of the conflict with Iran. Obviously, but to your point, Dan, I mean, I'm a little curious about this unsanctioning of these vessels, these Iranian vessels. I mean, are we talking about seizing and taking the cash from the vessels so that we get the supply? Or does that mean that the Iranians profit from the vessels that are unsanctioned? Because that would fund the war effort for them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to understand, for instance, in the case of Venezuela, they desanctioned that oil. PDVSA is now allowed to negotiate with others. We can negotiate to develop oil fields in Venezuela, but the money doesn't go to the regime in Venezuela. It goes to an account that's being held in a bank run by the Treasury Department. That's important. I assume that what Scott's going to do here is much the same.
Yeah.
We will control the money. We will control the oil.
Yeah, very good strategy there. The White House told energy executives yesterday at the White House that they're ruling out banning or restricting any oil exports as a way to ease prices. Last year, the U.S. exported nearly $1.5 billion of oil. Dan, it cannot be overestimated enough the fact that today the U.S. is energy independent, and the president has opened up the capacity significantly just in his first year in office.
He really has,
Back
and
in
I think a lot. Back in office, yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the policy foundation that was set in the first Trump term are paying dividends today.
Yeah.
The president has focused almost, in an incredible way. I can't even overstate how much time he has spent on things like infrastructure, both overseas and here in the United States. Many have pointed out that the United States has its own Strait of Hormuz, if you will. It's called the state of New York. We can't build a pipeline across that state to get natural gas into places like Boston. So I think it's important that the president continue to focus on that. And he has.
Yeah, and you want to see those pipeline permitting, you want to see that codified, David.
Oh, sure. I mean, much of this discussion has been around supply. And Dan, you know very well the permitting process. And what could the U.S. be doing that helps ease some of the permitting and get more energy supply to U.S. consumers?
Well, I think that what the administration has done so far with regard to things like the National Environmental Protection Act, which is commonly known as NEPA, changes to that, allowing people to, yes, have a day in court. If you have an issue, bring it to your court, get your day in court. But, you won't have 10 days in court. You won't have 100 days in court. So, looking at judicial reform, looking at the speed at which these agencies are processing these permits, those are all of the things that we can do, and this president has done in the second term very, very aggressively.
Yeah, it's great. He's done a lot through executive order, has been real effective there, and also included a lot in the big, beautiful bill, by the way. Dan Brouillette, thanks for your leadership on this. We know all that you did in the first term of the Trump administration. We appreciate your time today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Maria.
Dan Brouillette. We'll be right back. Stay with us.